Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to get into some beginner's basics and I'm going to show you everything I've learned about base painting art stones. We all know there's no such thing as the perfect rock, but with a few supplies and a little bit of know-how, nobody needs to know that but us. Let me grab a few supplies and I'll show you how to base paint your art stone for your next acrylic work of art. Now, I've been painting rocks for several years, and the hardest thing to learn was that no two projects were alike. Each one of these stones represents what I run into most commonly when I begin to base paint. I want to show you all the things that I might go through to prep these stones for my next mandala. All four of these stones were made with Ultra Cal 30. I have a full video on how to make them. I'll leave that link down below and at the end, so if you're interested in making some, you're more than welcome. The first thing you need to know is they need to be absolutely dry. I made these stones over a year ago and they've been sitting on my art desk ever since. I'm absolutely sure they're dry. A good rule of thumb is, when you pull them out of the mold, let them dry no less than 5 days before you go to base painting. The longer they wait, the better. So my first tip is absolutely going to be, make sure that you are painting a dry stone. Just because it looks dry doesn't mean it is dry. Wait 5 days. All right, so let's take a look at these stones and see what they require. So basically the rest of this tutorial is going to come down to personal preference. Y'all, this first stone looks wonderful to me. I'm not too concerned with what the back looks like. All I'm really studying is the front of this stone and making sure that the pores, maybe holes, are not so big that they mess up the shape of my dots and teardrops when I'm painting that mandala. This one looks really good to me, so all I'm going to do is give it a couple of coats, front and back, of acrylic black paint. That's totally going to accommodate the acrylic paint I plan on painting a mandala with. So I'm going to squirt out a good bit of paint right here on top of the stone, and I'm going to get my favorite paintbrush. It is a flat brush, and I'm going to tell you, the softer the bristle, the better, at least in my opinion. And I say that because it seems like the softer the bristle, the less brush strokes you're going to see in that stone when you're done. I'm going to get this rock good and coated, and then I'm going to go back just lightly holding that paintbrush over the surface of the rock and putting all of the brush marks in the same direction just in case they show. But seriously, the softer the brush and the lighter the stroke, the less of those brush marks you're going to see. Can you see how lightly my brush is touching this rock? I mean, it's just barely any pressure. At the very end, I almost just let it sit on the rock as I drag it across. It seems to help. All right, this looks great. I'm going to go ahead and let this first coat dry, and then we will come back to this because there's still a lot you need to know. We'll turn it over and we'll do the back and probably give it a second coat. While we wait for it to dry, let's check out these other stones. I'm eyeballing this stone right here. It looks pretty good to the naked eye, but when I get closer on it, the pores in it look just a little too big, especially around the edges, for my paint to cover up. I think you're going to see that, especially since sometimes my mandalas don't go all the way over that edge. So I'm thinking it needs just a little help. I picked up a really good tip from another artist. She's got a channel on YouTube called JaDeLRocks. She has a video there called Make Your Own Stones. In it, she suggests giving your stones a simple little coat of Mod Podge, and it is going to fill in all those tiny, tiny little pores. I'm going to tell y'all, it works. For holes this size, it is perfect. I'm going to use a flat brush with super soft bristles. Once again, I'm going to spread this over the entire top of this rock. I'm going to try really, really hard to work those bristles into all these tiny little holes. Basically, I'm just trying to plug them up so that my paint will glide right over it once this is all dry. If you're not already subscribed to JaDeLRocks, go over there and subscribe and tell her thank you for a super good tip. Once I feel like I have this all good and coated, I'm going to do the same thing I did with that black base paint, and I'm going to lightly go over it and try to minimize the brush strokes. That's a little hard to do with Mod Podge, especially with all of my lighting. It seems to want to dry really fast. Nonetheless, I'll let it dry naturally, and I'll set this one aside while we take a peek at another. All right, well, what about this stone? It's got a lot of tiny holes in it that the Mod Podge would probably work for, but it's got a few that are too big for that. It's got a bunch of dark spots in it, and it's completely uneven, and I want to paint it white. Well, I'm going to have to get out the gesso. Now, gesso is just a primer that you can put on things that have porous or absorbent surfaces. What it does is it gives it a kind of textured layer where when you get ready to put your real base paint down, it's not going to just suck up all your paint. It's going to give you a good even layer, and it's really going to cover up a lot of these dark spots and fill in some of these holes. I'm going to apply it the same way I did the Mod Podge, just a flat brush, a good even coat, and I'm going to try really hard to do a thin layer. This gesso is really thick, so if you're not careful, you're going to leave a lot of brush strokes before you ever even get your base paint on there. If you've ever tried to base paint anything white, you know it almost always takes multiple layers, and sometimes that can get really frustrating. You put on a layer and then you have to wait at least an hour or so for the next layer, and then you repeat that process so many times. This gesso is going to cut down the amount of layers of white paint that we'll have to put on this rock. We'll let this dry while we check out that last art stone, and then we'll come back to it and see exactly how many layers of white paint it'll take to give it a good base paint. Okay, I saved this one for last because it has got some pretty big holes in it. When I made this stone, I totally forgot to tap all the bubbles out. Y'all, it's a big mistake. If you know, you know. But now I'm stuck with a stone with a lot of holes in it. That's okay. I've got a great tip for you. We're going to save this stone with just a simple little step. All I'm going to do is get out some spackle. Y'all, this is the same stuff people use to cover up little holes in their sheetrock walls, wood walls. I've used it on all sorts of stuff. I feel like if it's good enough to cover up a hole from a nail, it's definitely good enough to cover up a hole left over from a bubble. All I'm doing is just dipping out a little bit and packing it into the holes I see. I'll be careful to go around this rock and make sure I plug up all the holes that I see. And then we'll be back and I'll show you how to smooth it out. All right, I've plugged up all the holes on the front side of this stone, and now you have two options. You can either let this spackle dry like it says on the container, or I have found out that if you just get a napkin, get it a little wet, and wipe it down, it's perfectly smooth, no sanding needed. Now, the directions on the container of spackle are going to tell you to wait 1 to 5 hours and then sand off any excess. I don't like the mess, but you can do that if you want to. Here in a minute, we'll turn this stone over, and I'll do it just that way so you can see how to do that as well. Now, before we get to the other side or any second coats, we need to let these dry. I am a firm believer that the longer you wait, the better, but I'm going to ask you to wait at least 1 hour. All right, I let all of these dry overnight, and they are perfectly dry. Let's go back to the first stone that we gave 1 coat of black paint. I'm going to want to give it a second coat, but not until I check out that back side. Okay, so this is where that personal preference is really going to come into play. Y'all, I am never really picky about the back side of my stone. As long as it sits pretty level on a table, I don't worry too much with all the little holes. I'm only going to put a signature back there and be done. So I just go ahead and paint them, flaws and all. But if you want the back side of your stone to be as smooth and as pretty as the front side, hold tight. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. For now, I'm just going to take a flat brush and I am going to work it into all the little grooves or holes or any kind of flaws that I see. I'm going to paint them. The backside of the rock really does tend to soak up a lot more of the paint than the front side, so I'm pretty liberal with how much paint I put on there because I want all those tiny little holes to suck up that paint so we don't see that white. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this one dry, and let's move on to another stone. All right, so let's check out the back side of the one that we put spackle on. Now, if you want the back of your stone as smooth as the front, no problem, get the spackle back out. But y'all, the back is gonna take a lot more spackle than the front, so let's put on some gloves and use our hands. I'm wearing a nitrile glove. It's the same ones I use for my resin. Basically, I am just dipping into my spackle bucket, getting a little bit out, and I am rubbing it into every little pore, every hole, every little imperfection, anything I see wrong on the back of this stone. I am just slopping it on there, slathering it on, and making sure that it is good and covered. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's let it dry completely, and then we'll come back and we'll sand it just as smooth as we can. You guys are going to love the results of this. All right, let's check out the back side of the Mod Podge rock. The front looks great. I want to go ahead and do the same thing to the back of the rock. I want to be really good and consistent with it. So let's give the back the same coat of Mod Podge. We'll use the same flat brush, really working this material into the holes and pores of this stone and see if we can't get it to a good, smooth, beautiful finish when we put that black paint on it. All right, while the Mod Podge is drying, let's get to the gesso stone. Y'all, I want to paint this whole stone white, so what I'm going to do is give the backside a good coat of gesso. There is really something to the backside of these stones just really wanting to soak up whatever paint you put on there. So this is going to be super helpful no matter what color you're painting your stone. I find it really, really helpful if you're looking for a light colored stone. Anyway, let's give it a good coat with our flat brush just like we did the front. Now I've gotten way too much gesso on here, so it's okay. I'm just gonna scrape some off with my paintbrush. I've got an old piece of paper here I'm just wiping it off on until I get a good even coat, and then I'm gonna let it dry. All right, I took a little break to let these dry. I wanna say I was probably gone about 3 or 4 hours. And now I'm back to go ahead and finish. I'm going to start off with our first rock. I'm going to go ahead and give a second coat to the back, and then I will let that dry for at least that hour. I'll turn it over and give the front its second coat. I always do the second coat of the front side last. Sometimes when I turn them over on my surface, I'll get them dirty or scuff it or what have you. I would rather scuff the back than the front any day. So I'm going to give a second coat to the back, let it dry, and then a second coat to the front. Okay, now let me get everything out of the way, and we are going to sand the back of this stone that has the spackle on it. Y'all, I'm going to recommend that you do this over a trash can, but preferably even outside somewhere. It can get kind of dusty and messy. I'm also going to say wear the proper dust mask. Anyway, look up all the safety instructions and make sure you're taking care of yourself. That's all. What I'm going to do, I'm doing it on my desk just because I want to show y'all in the good lighting and all of that what I'm doing. But I am just going over it with this super fine sandpaper. It is so easy to sand. It's not going to be something you need a bunch of elbow grease for. You're just going to want to keep going over it until you feel like, hey, that looks pretty good. It's smooth. I want to keep it. And then you're just going to dust it off and you're going to go on and paint it. Okay, I have to admit that looks really pretty on the back side there. Kind of makes me think maybe I should do this all the time. I guess if you're going to spend hours hours and hours putting your best work of art on these stones, why not give them a really beautiful foundation to start with? All right, while that's drying, let's check out our gesso stone and see if there's anything else we need to do to this stone before we start putting our base paint on it. Right away, I can see that the gesso didn't quite fill up those big holes. It looks like it did a fantastic job on all the little pores, but I'm giving it one more coat just to see if we can fill in a little bit more of that big hole there. All right, that should do it for those holes. Let's go ahead and let that dry and check out the Mod Podge rock. It is completely dry. Let's put this hack to the test and go ahead and put one layer of our black base paint on the back side. Okay, I have to admit, this looks fantastic. I am loving this hack so far. We're gonna let that dry. Let's go back to our first rock, turn it over, and give it our final coat on the front. Okay, do you see where it was sitting on the front side of this rock? It left that circle, that mark. Y'all, it doesn't matter how careful I am. I swear I always get something on it. So I've just learned over the years, do the final base coat on the front last. That's what I'm gonna do right now. All right, that looks great. I'm gonna put it aside and let it dry. We'll come back and do a reveal later, but let's move on to the spackle rock. Y'all, I can't get over how good the back of this stone looks. I might be sold. I'm gonna flip it over, and I think it's only gonna need one coat of black paint. I think the spackle is really making up the rest. I'm just gonna paint it like we did any other layer at this point. All right, that looks really good. I'll put it to the side with the other one. Now we're down to two. However, I'm gonna let these dry. Y'all make sure they're completely dry before you move on. With the magic of editing, we can move on right now. Okay, let's start by giving the Mod Podge rock its first coat of black paint. And now we'll give the gesso stone its first coat of white base paint. I'll be using the same brand of paint that DecoArt Americana. This is their Snow White. I'm gonna give it one coat of white paint just like we did the black. Same brush, same idea, just white. Okay, let's let those dry and take a look. Let's go ahead and give each stone one more coat of paint. And then there was one. Y'all, this is going to take a few more layers of white base paint in order to be just what I would consider perfect. So far we have 2 coats of gesso and we have 2 coats of white. Let's see how many more layers it takes. I'm going to fast forward through it so you don't have to watch me paint it over and over again. Okay, this looks fantastic. 4 coats is perfect. So we have 2 coats of gesso and 4 coats of white paint. Let's turn it over and see how many coats the back takes. All right, so the back took 2 coats of the white paint along with the gesso, and it looks fantastic. It's completely dry, and y'all, this is a gorgeous, perfect white stone. I cannot wait to paint. Let's look at the rest of them and see how they turned out. We'll start out with the one that we just coated in black base paint. So looking at all of these stones together, I'm really starting to see that the minimal effort is yielding minimal results. Y'all, I can see brush strokes on the front of this rock. When you turn it over, I can't help but think it really needs some of that spackle. And when I look really, really closely, I can see the pores right around the edges. One coat of Mod Podge would have totally fixed that. I think from here on out, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on my base paint. My mandalas deserve it. That's what I think. So let's see what kind of foundation they deserve. Check out the rest of our rocks. Looking at the stone that we covered in Mod Podge, I'm really impressed with the front of this stone. Y'all, there were some pretty big holes in there, and it did a decent job at covering them up. For minimal effort, I'm saying this is the way to go. But I think I'm most impressed with the rock we did the spackle on. Y'all, I have used this before for some holes, and I know it's awesome, but I don't remember if I've ever done the back of a rock. And I'm serious. This whole thing looks so beautiful to me. I can't wait to paint it. I think all of my mandalas deserve a stone like this. I am going to try so hard to remember to do this. I will say that I think we should have put 2 coats on the front as well. But that's an easy fix. This stone looks great. Now let's take a look at the stone we easily spent the most time on. Y'all, this rock had 2 coats of gesso, front and back. It had 4 coats, I believe, of paint on the front and 2 coats on the back. But isn't it gorgeous? Oh my gosh, y'all, you can paint this any color you want now. You can leave it white. Any of your vibrant colors are going to look gorgeous on this background. This is such a desirable thing, and I think maybe just because it takes so much time to achieve, but I bet it's worth it. Now the hard part, you gotta let it dry at least 3 days, preferably a week. That way any pencil marks will come off really easy, and if you need to wipe off a mistake, you don't wipe off your base paint too. All right, I think I covered everything that you might run into when you're base painting art stones. If I missed something and you still have questions, by all means, leave me a comment below. Y'all, I read every single one of them, and so far, I think I've answered every single one of them, so leave me a comment. I love talking about this stuff. If you have another subject you'd like to see me take a deep dive into for beginners, let me know. For now, I hope you check out my channel. I have over 500 tutorials that I know are going to help you out, from very beginner basics all the way to some really crazy and wild, huge mandala paintings. My channel is full of tutorials for you to follow along with and paint with me. I'll leave a whole playlist right here of some good getting started videos, and I'm going to leave you another playlist right here of some really pretty mandalas. I hope you watch them all. And until next time, rock on.